we are in our GIT physiology. So today we are going to talk about the chapter 74, that is gastrointestinal motility. So before that we'll revise whole chapter, like what are the important features. So first we'll see what are the walls of GIT. So the walls of GIT, it's like from inner side to the outer side. So inside we have our mucosa layer, and later we have the lamina propria, and next we have the muscularis mucosa. So this mucosa, lamina propria and muscularis mucosa, three together form the mucosa layer, and next we have the submucosa, and next we have the muscularis. So normally we have mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa. Inside the mucosa we have mucosa, lamina propria, muscularis mucosa. Inside the muscularis externa we have inner circular layer, circular smooth muscle, and outer longitudinal smooth muscle, and finally the outermost layer is a serosa layer. So this is the order from inside to the outside. So the smooth muscle is present both in muscularis mucosa and also in the muscularis externa, but it is more in muscularis externa. So remember, muscularis externa have lot of smooth muscle. The smooth muscle make the bundles. Each bundle have about like 1000 smooth muscle cells, and these are arranged longitudinally in outer and circularly in inner layers of muscularis externa. So we have thousands of smooth muscles, but inner they are arranged as circulatory muscles, and outer they are exchanged as longitudinal muscles. Why muscularis externa is having more smooth muscle? Because you can see here it again need to form inside circular layer of smooth muscle and outside longitudinal, whereas even in muscularis mucosa we have smooth muscle but not that much. So you can remember, whenever you get inner circular, outer longitudinal muscle, it's muscularis externa containing lot of smooth muscle. Now these smooth muscles are connected with each other by means of gap junctions in one bundle, and they have the channels through which ions and small metabolites can pass through other cells. So now these smooth muscles are arranged in such a way that they have gap junctions. Whenever there is a gap junction, there is higher chance for exchange of all substances with one other cells. So any electrical activity in one cell is stimulated to all bundle cells in each bundle. This is known as syncytium. Means this all smooth muscle cells of the GI system, they are acting as a single unit. So one bundle is connected to the other bundle by again gap junctions. So they are called unitary smooth muscle, as they act as one electrically connected network. So there are also few connections between the longitudinal and circular layer, but in between the longitudinal or circular layer there are more gap junctions. They are also having some other connections, so mainly they also have the gap junctions everywhere. So in smooth muscles of GI system, always remember they are acting as a unitary system because of many gap junctions between them. So now let us see the interstitial cells of Kajal. So these interstitial cells of Kajal are called as the pacemaker of the smooth muscle in our GI system. So they are present between the longitudinal and circular layer. They can produce the pacemaker activity, that is the electrical activity which spreads to other layers of the smooth muscle. So as a heart, you can remember the GI system also has heart, because in heart also we have seen the gap junction, in heart also we have seen the pacemaker SA node. Here even in the GI system we have a smooth muscle network with gap junctions, and also we have a pacemaker, that is the interstitial cells of Kajal. So there are electrical fluctuations inside the cell. These are known as slow wave, and the resting membrane potential here for the gastrointestinal cells is minus 60 millivolts. So electrical fluctuations inside the cell mainly here are called slow waves. These are not true action potential, they are just waves. They are fluctuating between the resting membrane potential to threshold, and again resting membrane potential near to threshold, not an exact threshold, because if threshold start, again action potential start, so it will go near to threshold, again come to resting membrane. So the waves will be like this. These are the slow waves. And the resting membrane potential for this GI system is normally minus 60 millivolts. So they have a calcium channel, so the calcium moves inward slowly. Because of influx of calcium, the RMP becomes less negative from minus 60 to minus 50, or like even minus 40. So calcium is a positive ion. If the positive ion is coming inside, means the cell tries to become less negative, right? So later the potassium channels also open and lasts out, so the membranes become negative and again reaches the resting membrane potential. So potassium channels open. Because of opening of potassium channel, the potassium tries to come out of the cell, because inside the because of concentration gradient, as potassium is more inside the cell, so it tries to go out of the cell. So because of this, again the cell comes back to the resting membrane potential, that is minus 60, because of reaching the peak. So again it undergoes calcium influx and reduced to -40 or so. So like this, the continuous cycle with repolarization and depolarization. So this repolarization and depolarization of smooth muscle is a slow wave. So this is how the slow wave function. The slow wave have continuous depolarization and repolarization because of calcium and also our potassium. So calcium and potassium lead to formation of slow waves. These are not true action potentials, but not action potential. It is produced 3 times per minute. Very important. So slow waves are formed 3 times per minute, and slow waves in the jejunum ileum are like about 9 times per minute, and the slow waves in duodenum are 12 times. So you can see the always the small intestine plays an important role in our GI system, either in absorption, digestion. So even the slow waves are also high in the duodenum, means our upper small intestine, whereas coming to the jejunum and ileum, you can see the lower parts of small intestine, it has 9 times, and it's 3 times per minute. Its normal average value is 3 times per minute. So these are the slow wave values. In stomach, sorry, this 3 times per minute is in stomach. So in stomach, only acid reflux, acid production, so no not much role in absorption or either digestion. So stomach only 3 times per minute. So majorly it has 12 times in duodenum, 9 times in jejunum and ileum. So we can see the slow waves don't produce the contraction. Their RMP is -60 and the threshold is -40. So you should remember these values, and remember also they can't produce contraction, of course, because they are not true action potential. So the metacations like calcium in the resting membrane potential goes through threshold, and when potassium go out, it goes from threshold to RMP. Of course, as potassium is getting out, means the positive charges going losing from the cell, means cells try to become more negative, right? So because of this, the cell grows from the threshold again back to the resting membrane potential. So threshold to resting membrane potential is called repolarization, because again it is coming back to the original, to the RMP, that is repolarization. And from the resting membrane potential to the threshold is depolarization. I think already we have discussed this many times in our general physiology. So when slow waves reaches the threshold, then calcium channels trickle and calcium enter in, and it reaches the peak, forming a spikes of action potential, and this is called spike potential. So now we are coming to a phase like first the slow waves are formed, now the spikes are forming because the slow wave is now reaching the threshold. Whenever the slow wave reaches the threshold, it leads to formation of spike potential. These spike potentials are true action potential. So you can see spike potential is an action potential, slow wave is not an action potential. So slow wave is essential for the production of spike potential, very important. So why slow waves are there? You should remember this. Slow wave is a special unique characteristics of a GI system. Slow wave, why it is necessary? Because this slow wave only leads to reaching the threshold. So if it reaches threshold, then spike potential forms. So if the slow wave remains at threshold for more time, then multiple spikes are produced. So if the slow wave doesn't reach threshold, then no spike potential, and smooth muscle contraction produced by spike potential. Contraction is produced by spike potential because it's a true action potential. But remember, slow wave can't produce a contraction, and intensity of contraction is also of course more when the spike is more. So the calcium influx proportional to the contraction of smooth muscle. So how much calcium is coming, that much contraction of smooth muscle takes place. Spike potentials determine the phasic contraction, that is the intermittent contractility, means it will contract, again contract, means intermittent, not continuously. And also tonic contraction, that is prolonged contraction. Here there is also prolonged contraction. And the resting membrane potential when becomes less negative, its excitability will increase, because it's becoming less negative, means now it has higher excitability. When the resting membrane potential becomes more negative means its excitability will decrease. You can understand this. Less negative means nothing but it is becoming more positive. More positive means coming to the threshold. Nearer to the threshold means higher excitability. More negative means far from the threshold. If far from the threshold means lesser excitability. So when more negative, it's hyperpolarized and they can't reach the threshold, so no spikes are produced, so less excitability. When less negative, it's reaching threshold, spikes are formed, so more above and more excitability. So when smooth muscle stress, calcium influx increases, so resting membrane potential increases, so this leads to strong waves. So when acetylcholine or vagus, the parasympathetic plexus release acetylcholine, it involves the calcium movement inward and reaches the threshold and increases the excitability. So always remember the parasympathetic nervous system is useful for excitation of GI system. It's a special feature even for the GI, because in heart you have seen the sympathetic will leads to stimulation, increase in action, but here it's reverse. In GI system, parasympathetic will lead to increase in stimulation, because when you are in rest, then it's a nice time for the digestion, but not when you are in hurry, when you are in some strange condition where you need to fight there, not take rest, right? So norepinephrine stimulates the smooth muscle resting membrane potential away from the threshold that is more negative, that is decrease the excitability. So the sympathetic nervous system, the RNP is away from the threshold, so decrease excitability. So sympathetic will lead to decrease excitability, means it will, I think, completely stop or partially stop. So now we will see our enteric nervous system. So you can see here the enteric nervous system is a third division of autonomic nervous system. We know the autonomic nervous system is divided into already sympathetic and parasympathetic. The third one is our now enteric system. So enteric system is a specialized nervous system, especially it is seen in our GI system. It is also called as mini brain, like that, because it can even live without the sympathetic and parasympathetic control. So the two neuronal plexus, the first is present in submucosa. We already discussed the layers, right? So you may now get the idea of submucosa. So that is called as submucosal neural plexus. Other name is also called Meissner's plexus. So submucosa, mucosa, you can remember mucosa, Meissner's, mucosa. So submucosal neural plexus, also called as Meissner's plexus. Whereas the second plexus is present in muscularis externa, between the longitudinal and circular muscle layers. Other name is myenteric plexus or Auerbach plexus, or back, outer. So they're like somewhat you can remember like rhythmically, outside, outer, or back plexus, or myenteric plexus, muscularis externa. So in muscularis externa, myenteric or Auerbach plexus, submucosa in submucosal plexus or Meissner's plexus. So submucosa mainly regulate that is submucosal plexus mainly regulate the secretion, absorption, blood flow, neuronal activity of endocrine cells, all this local areas within the submucosa. So submucosa is like a local control. Whereas coming to Auerbach is also of course a submucous, not, it's a myenteric plexus. So Auerbach is in muscularis externa. It's useful for regulation of motility. So mainly now today we are studying the motility of GI system. So the motility of GI system is mainly regulated by our important Auerbach plexus, also called as myenteric plexus, which is located in the muscularis externa. So if the parasympathetic and sympathetic are disconnected with the enteric, it still works independently. So it is also called as mini brain. So if we eat some food, for example, if we eat chicken, the smooth muscles are stretched. The muscles and neurons are stretched, stimulated. So the myenteric plexus also stimulated. So whenever you eat anything, it comes into the GI system. When it gets stimulated, in that GI system, for example, this is a GI tract, you have ate something. So this leads to stretch of the GI muscles. So because of this stretch, this neurons also get activated, especially the myenteric neurons which are present in the muscularis externa. So because of this activation, they give the signal to the brain that the food has come to the digestive system. So now what happens, let us see. The law of peristalsis. The oral side is constricted. For example, this is the oral side, the mouth. This is the anus side, right? Output. This is input. So the oral side is constricted and anal side or aboral side is relaxed. So now you can understand the pressure. It's constricted here. This side it's open, means it is nothing but giving the way towards the anal side. So the food which you have eaten, now it will constrict this side. So because of this, myenteric plexus activated, this gives signal to the brain, and because of this, it starts the peristalsis. Here it gets constricted, here it pushes forward. So two networks of mucus neurons are present in myenteric plexus, that is ascending neurons towards the oral side and descending towards the anal side. So we have mainly two neurons. In myenteric is further divided into two types of neurons. We are having the ascending neurons, oral side. OA, you can remember like OA. Where is that? Yeah. Ascending neurons are towards the oral side, descending are towards anal side. So you can have OA. OA means overaction, we'll say like that for example. So OA means oral side, ascending. It's useful for pushing this word. And descending, we have our this anal side. So ascending contraction and descending relaxation during peristalsis, of course. So that's what we are saying. Ascending towards the oral side, it leads to constriction. So this side, it will lead to relaxation. So the food particle will move forward. So ascending produce acetylcholine, stimulatory neurotransmitter, and substance P. So acetylcholine, it's released from parasympathetic, and also the substance P is useful for this constriction and contracts towards the oral side. The sensory neurons also stimulate descending neurons of myntric plexus and release inhibitory neurotransmitters like nitric oxide, vasoinactive peptide, which act on longitudinal layer and on circular layer to relaxation. So, what are the substances which are required for constriction and relaxation? On ascending myntric plexus, on oral side, I have ascending type of neurons, especially acetylcholine and substance P are useful for constriction on oral side, and on anal side, mainly we have the nitric oxide and vasoinactive peptide, which are mainly used for relaxation, so the food can move easily forward. So this, So the circular muscles are relaxed and aboral to stimulus of bolus relaxed, and again these sensory neurons stimulate the ascending and descending. This cycle continues to form the contraction on oral and relaxation on anal side. So this is how the peristalsis movement takes place. So millions of neurons are present in enteric nervous system, similar to the spinal neurons. So even in the spinal cord, how many neurons you have? Like millions. The same number are also present in this enteric nervous system. So enteric nervous system is also regulated by parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, both by vagal and sacral outflow. Vagal especially we have preganglionic, which directly innervate the myntric and mesenteric. So they can be considered the postganglionic neurons of parasympathetic nervous system. So this myntric and mesenteric are also called as the postganglionic neurons of parasympathetic nervous system, because the parasympathetic nervous system directly gives its preganglia into the myntric and mesenteric, so they only in turn act as postganglionic and receive them, but whereas our sympathetic nervous system is not like that. It will give its postganglionic fibers only to our myntric and mesenteric plexus. So in sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic nerves terminate in the prevertebral ganglia and postganglionic fibers innervate the myntric and mesenteric. So very important. This is to remember. The parasympathetic directly they activate our myntric and mesenteric. So the myntric and mesenteric only act as postganglionic in the case of parasympathetic. Whereas coming to sympathetic, they also give their prevertebral and postganglionic neurons. The postganglionic neurons only activate the myntric and mesenteric in the case of sympathetic nervous system. Now we are in the sympathetic. Sympathetic, under the stress, it's an inhibitor of gastrointestinal system by norepinephrine, whereas parasympathetic enhances the gastronal activity. So sympathetic innervate the splanchnic system of blood vessel and reduce the gastronal activity. Coming to sensory fibers for local reflexes, they are myntric and mesenteric. Intragut reflexes, we have intragut reflexes, means within the gut there are some reflexes which either may inhibit or enhance the digestion. And we also have the sensory fibers up to sympathetic ganglion, gut to prevertebral, back to GIT, or from gastrocolic reflex. So these are like gastrocolic reflex and enterogastric reflex. So what are gastrocolic? If the gastric system is full, then it will block the colic system, that here there is lot of food, or whenever there is colic, means whenever in colon lot of food, then the gastric side is inhibited. And enterogastric, whenever in the stomach there is lot of food, then our small intestine side is inhibited. So like that, there are different types of reflexes. And sensory system, it gives to vagus and medulla CNS. The sensory fibers sympathetic ganglion also give coloileal reflex. So here what happens is actually the colon inhibits the ileum. So here I have written for everything, you can see that one. Gastrocolic. In gastrocolic reflex, stomach inhibits the colon. gastrocolic. In stomach there is lot of food, so it inhibits the colon. That yeah, stomach is inhibiting the colon. And in enterogastric reflex, small intestine is inhibiting the stomach, because in small intestine there is lot of food, so it cannot accommodate the more food coming from the stomach, so it will stop the stomach for a while. And here the stomach inhibiting the colon means, as a lot of food is present in stomach, so it inhibits the colon. And coloileal reflex is colon inhibit the ileum. Colon, it's a large intestine part, it inhibits the ileum, because in colon already lot of food, so like that. And this sensory are vagoreflex and defecation reflex. These are vagus medulla. So this is sympathetic, this is parasympathetic. So here the vagoreflex is from the stomach to the CNS, and the defecation reflex is return to the CNS, because from the stomach it will go into the brain, from the brain again it will return to the rectum to the CNS. Yeah, from the rectum it goes to the CNS and it gives a defecation process. And vagoreflex is from the stomach to the central nervous system, and again back from the central nervous system to the stomach. So now we will go into the functional types of movement in gastrointestinal system. So mainly we have the propulsive movement. It's a feature of unitary smooth muscle, as we discussed the syncytium smooth muscles. So there the propulsive movement, propulsion process also we discuss. And also we have the mixing movement, we need to discuss this. So if there is a strong parasympathetic stimuli, the peristalsis move more, and if it is less stimulus, less peristalsis, and it can do some mixing also. So mixing is for good digestion, for better absorption. The luminal content is constricted into multiple blocks, so it's like segments, like this the segments are formed, so that there will be greater mixing. So if myenteric plexus is absent, that is no neuronal crest cells migrate to the GIT wall. If a person is given atropine, then receptors for acetylcholine block. So acetylcholine is a major one which should stimulate the digestion. Now if acetylcholine is blocked by atropine, then it can't stimulate the mixing and propulsive movement, then of course the GI motility will decrease. So what is the law of gut? Whenever if myenteric plexus is intact, peristalsis will move more efficiently from oral side to anal side. So that is the law of gut. So ingestion we have here chewing, swallowing, motor functions of stomach. Chewing, it is of two types, like voluntary and involuntary. Always we think it's involuntary, like it is in our control, but chewing is also voluntary. For example, if you're eating food continuously, like you'll not find like how your tongue is moving, how your lips are moving, how your jaws are moving, how your teeth is interacting with food, right? You're not conscious about it when you start chewing anything for a long time. So it is also voluntary and involuntary. And difference between hunger and appetite. Hunger is like the desire to eat anything. So you're like so hungry, you say I want to eat whatever you give. But appetite is like when you say specifically I want to eat this food, this fries, or like that. And 5 and 9 cranial nerves, that is a trigeminal and glossopharyngeal nerves, take the information to the central nervous system to swallowing center near to the respiratory center, so that it gives stimulus for swallowing. And the motor nerves comes from 9 and 10 nerves. And for tongue movement we have 12th nerve, motor output. So now coming to here, the upper esophagus and lower esophagus sphincter is closed to prevent the flow of air into the food pipe, that is esophagus. What? Upper esophagus and lower esophagus sphincter is closed to prevent the flow of air into the food pipe. Yeah, whenever you're talking, in that case, or whenever you're breathing, then that's why when you're eating you can't talk, because talking involves air branch trachea, right? So soft palate moves upward to prevent the food entering the nasopharynx. Swallowing reflex brings vocal cord together, so we can't talk and eat simultaneously. And larynx moves forward and upward under the tongue, and epiglottis closes. So all this process that takes place because the food should only pass by the food tube, not to the nose or not to the trachea windpipe, right? So this all the process are prevention to prevent all this, because if by mistake food goes into a pipe, it may block airway and the person may die. So upper esophagus sphincter is inferior constrictor of pharynx, uh, and this upper sphincter opens and pharyngeal peristalsis takes place. It enters the esophagus and same peristalsis of pharynx continues. So finally it enters the lower sphincter and it relaxes by approaching bolus with above acetylcholine and substance P and lower side with VIP and NO. This is called receptive relaxation. We already discussed this process, what happens, right? Why it is called receptive relaxation? Because here acetylcholine is acting on it on a receptor, right? So in some diseases like eclasia, the lower sphincter doesn't relax, so all bolus stagnate at the sphincter. So in eclasia, there is no myntric plexus is present, and trypanosoma cruzi is affecting the myntric plexus. We have one we have our microorganism Trypanosoma cruzi affecting this myntric plexus, and when some food or bolus is sticky, it may stick to the walls and there is secondary peristalsis to move into the stomach. So the initial primary one is called initial peristalsis, and the second one is when the food, some of the food gets stuck in food tube, then we try to do it more with more peristalsis, so to remove that food. So that is called as secondary peristalsis. We'll see the part, this is getting longer, so we will continue this in our second part.